Hello, class. For this lecture, I will start by responding to a question regarding the need for innovation in government. I will then address the foundational mindsets necessary for innovation. Next, I will review a practical approach to innovation called human-centered design. And finally, I'll address some myths associated with innovation in government. So let's start the lecture off with a simple question. Is public service innovation even necessary for public administrators? In some ways, this is a personal question regarding how you see your career developing. Developing innovation skills will more than likely advance your career, and not doing so may possibly hinder it, as the public sector faces the dual challenge of rapidly evolving technology and increasingly complicated social challenges. On another level, if public service is your calling, then approaching that calling with a desire to improve the way we serve the public necessarily implicates the need for some level of innovation. As we will discuss later, that doesn't mean inventing the next generation of iPhone or electric vehicle, but it does mean looking for new and better ways to serve the public and efficiently manage tax dollars. There are certainly incentives and disincentives associated with innovation. We are answerable to legislative bodies and the general public, so if we fail, we may take some level of criticism for it. However, if we succeed, we serve the greater good and improve the way our government functions. I would suggest that creating an innovation toolkit as a public administrator is essential for three reasons. First, we are obligated to keep pace with the challenges and opportunities that present themselves to society and by default to public service. If we want to effectively do our jobs in a very dynamic social setting, we will need to keep pace utilizing innovation as a tool to accomplish that task. Second, having an innovative approach to our job performance can build trust in whatever governmental level we work on. The public's trust in government is at all-time lows right now. There are a variety of reasons for this, and many ways to improve it, some within our control as public administrators and some beyond our control. Striving for innovation and looking for new and better ways to serve the public and spend tax dollars more efficiently are ways to engender trust and confidence in government moving forward. Finally, looking to the future, you as public servants are going to get increasingly levels of responsibility to manage these difficult challenges. As you do, you will need to develop innovative solutions to these challenges, often at a leadership level. In anticipation of this eventuality, you are best served by developing not only a toolkit of innovation for yourselves, but learning how to encourage and support the development of similar toolkits in your teams. None of us have all the answers to these complex challenges, but with teams built on innovation, they will be best prepared to tackle these challenges as they come to pass. A theme you will see developing through the early part of this course is the creation of a personal toolkit of skills and abilities. Innovation is no different, and all public administrators should strive to build their own personal toolkit that includes an innovation component to it. The IBM Center for Business of Government examined the concept of innovation through their research and interviews, determined that public servants need to develop an innovation suite that includes 5 specific mindsets that support innovation. These mindsets are entrepreneurship, collaboration, adaptiveness, emerging technology, and leadership. I'll review each mindset and what they specifically mean when establishing that suite of innovation skills. The first mindset is entrepreneurial, which may not seem like an obvious mindset for a public servant. However, it is critical to becoming an innovative public servant, and it is actually one of the core skill sets that one must demonstrate if you have the desire to enter the federal senior executive service. In this instance, entrepreneurial means that the public servant should have a passion and commitment to public service, be self-driven and motivated in their approach to serving the public, have a passion for and commitment to serving the public, be willing to experiment with a level of courage, be able to leave their egos at the door for the greater good, and be self-motivated by the desire to problem solve for their customers or their citizens. The second mindset is the collaborative mindset, which to a degree we highlighted last week in our team building session. Here, the public servant must be able to acknowledge the strength in teamwork and be willing to share their achievements with everyone. This mindset requires the innovator to have the ability to build teams across multiple disciplines and fields as necessary, have a willingness to share success with his or her team members, have the ability to build champions of support for these efforts. In other words, being able to build support up the chain and get leadership to buy in on the types of innovation that you're engaging in. Have a strong ability to engage with other innovative thinkers effectively and productively, so that, again, you don't let your innovation ego get in the way, that you're able to leave that at the door and interact with fellow innovators in a productive manner. And then finally, have the ability to move past the traditional way of doing things. In a lot of ways, innovation is making incremental changes to existing policies or programs or approaches, not necessarily, creating the latest and greatest app or tool. The third mindset is the adaptive mindset, which requires a level of flexibility in any innovative leader. These folks are typically objective thinkers who are willing to look past the current state of performance in order to find a better way to do things. In fact, there's a whole leadership style that I did not cover during the first week that's worth looking at, and it's called adaptive leadership. And you can Google it, and there's books on it, and it's one of the things I learned when I was at the Federal Executive Institute, and I think it's a worthwhile area of leadership to brush up on if you have the time. The qualities displayed by the adaptive mindset include the willingness and ability to experiment and adapt based on the results of those experiments, whether the results were intended or not. So have the flexibility to adjust your approach based on the data. If the data says go in X direction, even if that's not necessarily where you wanted to go, then be willing to adapt and go in that direction. Second is an ability to adapt as much as possible to emerging tech and use these emerging technologies to your advantage. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be bound by technology. Oftentimes, technology and innovation are seen as one and the same, and they're really not. All innovation is not necessarily technology linked, while most changes in technology can be viewed as innovative. So keep that in mind. Additionally, an individual must have the motivation to improve processes and better serve their customers or citizens. Again, focusing on the customer and making sure that your service to them as a public administrator is the best possible. And then finally, having an understanding that innovation is more about people and process than it is about tech. So keep your citizens the focal point of any kind of innovation you're looking to do, as well as any programs or policies you're implementing. How do you do it to best serve the citizenry that you're working for? Again, as I'll note later in the lecture, technology is not always a prerequisite for innovation. And for those of us in the private sector, it may not always be accessible. So having an understanding of it is important, but we can't always rely on it. That said, IBM's research demonstrated that this mindset grounded innovators in not only emerging tech, but also the implications of that tech for processes and service. In other words, these innovators were current on the latest tech and able to envision how technology innovation could improve public service. So in this instance, the emerging tech mindset is really focused on maintaining some level of understanding about where tech is, and then being able to take that understanding and apply it to real life situations that might improve the way you do policy or do programs. And again, it may not always be a viable option given limited resources and limited access, but the ability to build that personal understanding of tech and the ability to transfer that knowledge into how it might impact public service is important to have. Additionally, the qualities reflected in the technology mindset include a strong confidence in the direction of your program, a grounded view of the opportunities and limitations posed by tech, because both are relevant, Tech is not a be-all, end-all, so you need to be able to ground whatever tech brings to your program in reality. Don't overpromise on what tech can deliver. Additionally, you need to have a clear understanding of the problem you're facing as a public servant and how a tech solution may be appropriately matched to it. It may not, but if you don't have a good understanding of the problem you're faced with, you can have all the technology solutions in the world, but none of it's going to matter. And then finally, be fearless in your approach to solving problems with tech, but also be rational enough to recognize unsurmountable roadblocks and then need to adjust your course accordingly. Again, tech isn't going to be a panacea of solutions for you as a public administrator. So be realistic about what it can and can't do, and be flexible enough to adjust your approach if you need to do that. Finally, the fifth mindset is a leadership mindset. And we certainly covered some of this in week 1, but it bears reviewing this in depth a little bit for this particular discussion. Those with a leadership mindset maintain a high level of authority regardless of their staff size. They are also able to demonstrate high levels of both self-confidence and modesty in the performance of their jobs. Not an easy thing to do. They had both an inspirational leadership style, so they were able to engender support and confidence and passion in their teams, and also a track record of achievement that imbued confidence in their abilities from their superiors. And I want to stress this superior to team lead relationship, because innovation isn't always going to be well received in certain organizations. And being able to have support from your superiors for these types of efforts is going to be critical. So having this inspirational leadership style and the track record of achievement is going to be important. Additionally, qualities that came with leadership mindset included your ability to pull back and let others lead. So having the confidence in your ability and your team's ability to move forward with the tasks at hand. You don't always have to lead from the front. Keeping your egos in check. Again, when you're in a team environment, you need to work as a team, and even if you're the leader, your ego shouldn't trump what others are doing. Encourage and support reasonable risk-taking. As I alluded to earlier, in government, we're, answerable to a number of authorities, including legislative bodies and the citizens. So taking reasonable risks is a good thing, but taking unreasonable or irrational risks is probably going to get you in trouble. So you're going to have to learn the balance between the two. Additionally, being open to new ideas, obviously a critical aspect of the leadership mindset when it comes to innovation. Leading by example is critical in any situation, including an innovation type of environment. And then finally, setting and performing by high standards of ethics and honesty. In other words, leading by example by living by and expecting a high standard of ethics and honesty in yourself and your team is critical. Now, these 5 mindsets aren't developed overnight, and honestly, no one's likely to 100% in all of them over the course of the career. These are very challenging. But if your goal is being a cutting-edge public servant, performing at a high level, then developing an innovation toolkit is essential. And developing and growing these mindsets is a map to that objective. So I encourage you to factor these mindsets in as you look to develop your skills as a public servant and expand your role in that endeavor. In keeping with my effort to focus on the practical, I want to review an innovative approach to problem solving called human-centered design. This is strictly an overview, as you could do a whole course on the subject. That said, it is a technique that can be learned and that has proven effective in both public, nonprofit, and public sectors. I've actually seen it work effectively at CDC, and I believe the skills associated with this approach could be a valuable part of that innovation toolkit I keep talking about. The term human-centered design was coined by design theorist Horst Riddle in his efforts to address wicked problems through a problem-solving method that is collaborative, adaptive, and centered on the complexities of human behavior. This approach was championed by Nobel Prize laureate Herbert Simon, developed and taught by the Stanford University Design School, and then really brought to common usage by IDEO, a digital design and consulting firm that utilizes design thinking to develop products, services, environments, and digital experiences. As stated by Donald Norman, those who utilize it view it as a philosophy, not a precise set of methods, but one that assumes that innovation should start by getting closer to the users and observing their activities. There are 5 steps that are involved in human-centered design: empathy, definition, ideation, prototype, and testing. Now, for purposes of this lecture, I'll go through each in order. But in reality, as you get involved in this process, it's an iterative process, meaning that you can go back to an earlier stage if you need to. If you get additional information through the ideation or prototype phase and need to redefine the problem that you're trying to solve, you would go back to step 2. If you go into the testing phase and find that the prototype that you wanted to work with isn't effective, you could go back to the prototyping phase or even the ideation phase. So it's an iterative process, but for purposes of simplicity, I'm going to walk through each step in this process as if it were linear. So in this process, empathy with a customer is a critical starting point. In this instance, empathy means understanding the wants and needs of your client, what might make their life easier and more enjoyable, and how technology can be useful for them. Empathetic design transcends physical ergonomics to include understanding what the psychological and emotional needs of your clients are. You want to understand the way they do things, why they do them, and how they think and feel about the world. Really, what is meaningful to them. This is the first step in the process, and it's a critical step. As stated by David Kelly, the founder of IDEO, the main tenet of design thinking is empathy for the people you're trying to design for. Leadership is exactly the same thing. Building empathy for the people that you're entrusted to help. And that's exactly our role as public servants. We're trying to support our citizenry at whatever level of government we're working in, and we're trying to understand what they need from us. And it's this type of empathetic approach that is the first step in the design thinking process. Simply put, this step places the people at the center of your project design. Once you've established this baseline, design thinking moves on to the definition phase. This phase focuses on a collection of qualitative data, which is turned into usable insights into the challenge that you're facing. This is then turned into a set of workable, personalized, data-driven solutions to the challenge at hand. The strategy develops a solution that's inherently built for the given context, rather than trying to develop a cookie-cutter approach to the given challenge. In other words, you're trying to craft a solution to the specific problem you're facing, not necessarily a broad solution to a broad set of populations. The next step is to ideate or ideation. In this case, ideation is a facilitated approach to brainstorming designed to generate a large number of ideas. Ideas that potentially inspire newer and better ideas that the team can then cut down into the best, most practical, and innovative ideas for the particular challenge that you're facing. The goal of the ideation stage is to develop solutions by expanding the solution space so that the design team is empowered to look beyond typical approaches to problem solving in order to find better, more innovative solutions to the problems impacting the specific customer or citizens. In this stage, there are a few rules that are critical to ensure success. First, you need to establish a time limit for the ideation process. Next, you need to identify the core subject or the aim of the ideation exercise. And it's important to stay focused on that core subject during the process. I think we've all probably been involved in brainstorming exercises that can go off on tangents, and it's critical to avoid those tangents and stay focused on the problem that you're dealing with. Next, participants need to avoid criticizing ideas. At this stage in the process, there are no bad ideas. In fact, the wackier the idea, the better. The goal here is to develop a large quantity of ideas that can potentially solve the problem. And so it's a true unjudged brainstorming exercise. Next, you really need to be able to build off each other's ideas. This is really a group effort, so there should be no pride of authorship in this environment. If you have an idea that builds and expands on your partner's idea, offer it up and make their idea better. Finally, you need to utilize a visual medium. In other words, write or draw down all the ideas that the group comes up with. You need to make a list, and it can be pictures or it can be words, but just be able to document every single idea that the group comes up with. And then finally, this may seem obvious, but one conversation at a time is expected during this process. It's a respectful way to approach ideation, and frankly, it benefits the organizational approach as well. Gives you time to document the ideas, make sure you truly understand what folks are talking about, and can capture all of that for later on. Once the brainstorming is completed, the group then selects the preferred ideas through a voting mechanism that the group has agreed upon prior to the ideation effort. In my case, I've been involved in a number of these exercises. We often use dots to do the voting, and you may get 3 or 5 dots, and you can place up to 5 dots on one idea. You can spread all 5 dots around to 3 or 4 ideas that you like the best. But it's best to establish what that process is going to be ahead of time. Once the ideation process has been completed, the team moves to prototyping. And in this phase, the design team produces a scaled-down version of the product or service so that they can be shared with others, tested for effectiveness within the team, within the larger organization you're working in, or with small external groups or partners that can determine whether the prototype is effective or not. In this phase, the team is experimenting with the prototypes to determine whether the prototype is accepted to the clients, can be approved upon based on client experiences, needs to be re-examined as a viable option, or just needs to be rejected based on client feedback. This will give the team a better sense of how the real clients will behave and think and feel when interacting with the end product. The last stage of this process is testing, and here designers test the completed product or service using the best options identified during the prototyping phase. And while this is the final stage of the model, as I said earlier, it should be an iterative process. So feedback from the customers, a continued empathetic engagement with them, should be used to adjust and refine the identified solution in order to ensure complete success. So why have I focused on this approach when there are clearly other strategies to facilitate innovation in the public sector? I have several reasons. First, I know it to be a successful tool in both the public, nonprofit, and private sector, based on its success worldwide, as well as my personal observations at CDC. Second, it places the customer, or in our case, citizens, at the center of the problem solving. And this is something that we as public servants often forget in the hustle and bustle of getting the job done. We're here to serve the public, and something that places the public front and center to our efforts, I think, is an important tool to have. Third, it's a tool that you can add to your toolkit with relative ease. There are a lot of free online resources available to everyone to develop this tool. Fourth, it emphasizes a partnership approach to innovation, which I believe is the key part of the work we do as public officials and critical to any innovation activity you're engaging in. None of us have all the answers to all the challenges we face, and taking a team approach is really going to help us get to a better place when it comes to serving the general public. Finally, it's a practical approach to seeking innovation solutions to the challenges we face as public servants. It can be utilized at all levels of government. It's a step-by-step process that we can easily learn as public servants and can utilize to the benefit of the citizens that we serve. I would like to close this lecture by busting some myths associated with the concept of innovation, particularly as it relates to the public sector. First, many people often roll their eyes when they hear the term innovation. They will view it as a buzzword because it's a term that's often misused or overused. GovLab uses a definition of innovation that I believe fits any level of government: the creation of new, viable offerings that adds value. The innovation you develop doesn't have to be groundbreaking. As I said before, it doesn't have to be the next iPhone or the next electric car. For us in the public service, this definition means finding new and better ways to translate ideas and make them viable into better processes, services, and solutions to the public we serve. And viability is the key. If something you come up with is not viable, not practical, then it's just an idea, and it's never going to progress beyond the idea stage. So viability is really what we ought to focus on when we're trying to be innovative in carrying out our duties as public servants. Second, innovation doesn't necessarily require technology. In the public environment where most of us function with technology that is often a generation or two behind, this isn't always viable. Tech can certainly help, but we don't necessarily need tech to come up with an innovation or creative solution that meets our customers' needs or solves a challenging social problem. So, for example, in the world of cardiovascular health, one of the most at-risk populations is African Americans. One approach to educate and screen and help African American men access cardiovascular care is through the neighborhood barbershops. Barbershops, through their established credibility as forums for in-depth discussions, information gathering, and the relaying of shared experiences, provide an opportune venue for health outreach to African American men. Numerous studies and pilot projects done by CDC, NIH, the National Institutes of Health, and others have demonstrated that utilizing barbershops in conjunction with other local community partners is an effective, bottom-up, community-centered approach to addressing this issue. There's nothing high-tech about this approach, but what it does do is it comes up with a simple solution that builds upon existing resources and rethinks our approach to expanding access to both health information and health services. As I alluded to in number 1 and number 2, innovation doesn't need to be new. It just needs to be an improvement on existing processes or services or technology that helps us meet a social need. And the barbershop example is a perfect example of meeting a social need without using technology at all. Number 4 is the misnomer that some of us suffer from. I am not an innovator. In point of fact, we can all be innovators. We just need the knowledge and skills necessary to think innovatively and achieve it. One of the reasons I focused part of this lecture on human-centered design was to demonstrate that there are skill sets that can be developed that encourage and support innovation. And as current or future public servants, you have the intellectual capacity to develop those skills if you choose to do so, and I encourage you to do that. Finally, public service is often viewed with skepticism on many things, including serving as a source of innovation. We discussed this a bit during the fireside chat, and it can be a challenge, but not an insurmountable challenge. There are countless examples of government innovation out there today, and some of the course materials for this section addresses those very examples. Innovation is a mindset, as discussed earlier in this lecture, and one that should be built and nurtured. Never let the generic, lazy perspective of some color your ability to do better for the public that you serve as innovative public servants. Thank you for your attention during this lecture, and if you have any questions about it, please feel free to email me.